Thank you for having me, John. As you know, I'm a real estate attorney. I, of course, do corporate work. I've been practicing here in Florida since 1995, and so I've been around quite a while. I have a title company called Priority Title, and I have a law firm also. And the law firm specializes, of course, in real estate, asset protection, estate planning. We do business stock transfers, purchases and sale of businesses. We also do some e-commerce work, tokenization of real world assets on the blockchain. I've been involved in a few companies like that. I'm actually in the process of helping a European company put their footprint here in the U.S. that is getting into that space as well. They're already in Europe.
Mhm.
We do some estate planning work, trusts. When I do a lot of Latin American work, I work with a lot of Latin American investors. And of course, the title company is a title insurance agency, and we mostly there do, real estate transactions. And I would say that, yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for a long time. And they say, love what you do and you'll never work again. And I think that I definitely chose something that I really love, which is I love real estate
Mhm.
and the law. And it's always challenging. Of course, it has its days, as you know, like anything else. I mean, sometimes it's great, and sometimes you want to pull your hair out. But overall, it's a nice practice, and I really enjoy working with investors and developers and people who have that vision of they want to create something, and whether it's creating a real estate development project or
Mhm.
creating their own portfolio of investment properties.
Mhm.
It's just a lot of fun, and it's a pleasure to be able to help people to sort of effectuate those that vision and those dreams.
Right, right, right. No, that's
Yeah,
super exciting, Michael, and I
yeah,
appreciate you making time to join us on the podcast.
my pleasure.
Just a quick background on this. You recently helped me with two closings on the two investment properties that we've acquired, and the closing process couldn't have been any smoother,
Thank you.
especially in the current times that we're dealing with
Yeah,
the rising interest rates, with the recessions and everything going on. So that I'm glad that everything worked out. You've mentioned you kind of offer the full spectrum, seems, for the investor when it comes to real
yeah,
estate, from the acquisition all the way to the closing, and then the management of that from a perspective of setting up the trust and how essentially you structure your
right.
holdings, your portfolio of that, which is a very interesting space for me because I constantly try to educate myself on how to
Right.
get all of that set up. Maybe, and you've been in this industry for quite some time. I would imagine you've seen all different cycles, all different iterations.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where the market is actually going. What's your personal take on what's going on in the current market when it comes to real estate? Looking into the crystal ball of Michael, share some of your personal
Right.
insights and
Well,
thoughts.
well, I would say that like anything else, nobody knows, right? Nobody really knows. I mean, it's all speculation based on different data sets and things like that. But I will say this: that as you know, real estate is very local. You can't it can't be painted with a wide brush, because every part of the U.S. is different in terms of real estate. I mean, there's markets are very it's hyper local. They're so you can't say that what's happening in Arizona is going to happen in Florida, for example. So what I would say is, based on what I've read, based on the experts that I've talked to and read about, that Florida is the outlier, which is the good news for Florida investors. Florida is very unique in the sort of in the real estate spectrum, in that we do have the most amount of foreign investors that invest in Florida. We do have 1,000 people a day that move to Florida. I think last year, we had a mass exodus, and during COVID, of people leaving states like California and Illinois and New Jersey, and New York in particular, where they're all coming to Florida. And, and they all have their different reasons, but Florida has great asset protection. We have great weather. We have no state income tax. We have a pretty solid real estate market. And so I think that all of those factors lend itself to say that Florida is not Austin, Texas. I mean, or Arizona. I mean, we're a very different market. And across the U.S., most of what I've seen that they're predicting is a decrease in values in a lot of markets, a lot of inventory coming on the market, so a lot more competition. It'll cause price pressure to sort of come down. And the exception to that rule seems to be South Florida. And there was a Goldman Sachs report. They're a pretty reputable bank. I mean, everybody knows Goldman Sachs.
Mhm.
And Goldman Sachs said that that the Miami metro market, which I would say really is South Florida, Broward, Palm Beach, Dade County, is one of the only markets that is going to experience price appreciation. So I thought that was a very positive thing. And again, of course, nobody knows. But when you have large banks and internationally renowned banks like that put out reports like that, I mean, it is encouraging. So I think overall what we're going to see in the market, in the South Florida market, in both residential and commercial, is that you're probably going to see a slower rate of appreciation. We're not going to see 10 to 15% or 20 like we were seeing maybe before, but we're going to see some appreciation probably to a more normal level, like
Mhm.
3-4%. But certainly, well, not certainly, but according to what these experts are saying, that we're not going to see a decline in values, but rather just a slower rate of appreciation. And that is because, again, in Florida you have all these external factors that influence our market, like foreigners coming here, lots of people from South America. They still view this as a bargain to buy real estate here. And so I think I would say I'm bullish on the future of the market over the course of the next year or two. It remains to be seen how the next potential rate increase may affect the market.
Yeah.
They are saying that Jerome Powell and the Fed are going to raise the rate again because they're not satisfied with the deacceleration of inflation.
Right.
So it sort of remains to be seen. But I do remain bullish. And also people forget that in South Florida, we have the ocean on one side and we have the Everglades on the other.
Mhm.
So there just isn't a lot of land here, and we have a lot of people packed into these areas. So you'll probably see more infill projects. I also think that a trend that you're going to see is repurposing, which I think is great because we have a giant affordable housing problem in South Florida. And we also have a lot of office buildings that have gone, dark, for lack of a better word, for where they've just they're these properties that people have moved out, and they've sort of kind of gone bust. And what do you do with a piece of real estate like that, or what do you do with an old shopping center that really isn't doing anything? Well, one of the ideas that we're seeing is repurposing of those projects, that real estate, of shopping centers, of old office buildings into affordable and workforce housing.
Mhm.
And so I think you're going to see more of that. And there was a law that was passed about 2 years ago now. But what this law said is that you could to sort of crystallize it into just a couple sentences, basically that if somebody wants to build affordable housing or workforce housing and you want to do it in an area where there needs to be a zoning change, that municipality has to basically be flexible in allowing for the zoning change. And it says notwithstanding any kind of historical rules that they might have had. And so so long story short is that what we have is a legislative environment now that is encouraging this repurposing. It's encouraging more affordable housing, and it could be in a warehouse district. It
Mhm.
could be in an industrial district. So there really doesn't seem to be any limits right now as to where some of these projects can be built. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for investors.
Mhm. I like that,
Yeah,
especially the last point that you were making with reclassification, repurposing of
right.
the assets.
Repurposing. Yeah,
I see a lot of that. I'm actually myself experiencing a lot of them, having to adjust to the current market conditions
right.
in the real estate scenario. So that makes a lot of sense. I definitely, it resonates on so many levels with, especially, as an investor, you have to adapt. You have to study the trends and see where the markets is going. But at the same time, I preach a lot from my personal perspective that I have an investment thesis. These are the parameters that are, non-negotiables for me, and this is what I play in. These are the areas that I
Right.
invest in. These are my assets. And at the end of the day, if the rates go up or if the rates go down, it's a cyclical game. At the end
Yeah,
of
of
the day,
course.
it's not something that's here to stay permanently. So it's just a matter of finding the deal that actually works for you, works for your personal investment thesis. Which leads me to a further point that you and I were briefly chatting about, different topics to cover on the podcast and things like that. And you've mentioned additional recent, I guess, law or, some type of changes, especially when it comes to condominiums. And me personally, as an investor, I've been in as an investor for about 10 years myself. And I personally tend to stay away or try to refrain from looking at anything that has a homeowners association or some type of a governing body that controls all the rules and regulations within that particular asset. And especially with the things been going on in the condominium space in South Florida for the past couple of years, some unfortunate events with, the building collapses and things like that.
Right, right.
Um, what are the things that you're seeing in this space? Maybe talk a little bit further about some of these changes in laws, and also which opportunities changes like this actually does create.
Yeah, this is something that has been, of course, a long time coming. And here they've been talking about it since the collapse of Surfside. And of course they've for the last couple years they've been talking about this. And recently they did pass a law called the Surfside law. And basically that statute is going to require that older condominiums, that they now perform these structural inspections, and they have to hire an engineer, and they have to create a report. If there's a phase one report, for example, and that phase one would be, after 25, once the condominium is 25 years old, they have to do this inspection. And there's about 80%, I think is the last number I've heard, 80% of the condominiums in Florida are actually older than 25 years old. So you have a lot of old condominiums.
Wow.
And so this law is going to require that all of these condominiums, basically step up and start to fix the problems that they've been ignoring for a long time. And so what's been happening over the last, I don't know, 25 years or more, is that they do what I call kicking the can down the road.
Mhm.
We're going to waive the reserves. We're not going to put any money in reserves because nobody wants their maintenance to go up. So we're not going to fix the balconies. We're not going to fix the pool. We're going to defer on. We're going to
Right.
punt, as we say in, NFL football. And so you had a lot of that was going on. And in fact, that was the last board meeting that they had at Surfside was about this. People were saying, no, you're not going to increase our maintenance because, we're on a fixed income, and we don't need to do that. And, that was sort of the big, argument that they had there. And, look what happened. So now, boards are not going to be able to waive reserves anymore. So, before, where they had the option of doing it, now they're not going to be able to waive them anymore. Well, with the exception of things that are life threatening, I guess, like, we need to replace the brick pavers by the pool. Okay, well, brick pavers aren't anything that's life threatening. So probably not a big deal. But, you know, uh, the boards now are really going to have to step up to the plate, and they're going to have to, put money aside to fix these things. And before they even do that, they got to make a determination as to, what needs to be fixed and what problems does the building have. So between now and the end of the year, all of these associations have to basically engage an engineer, a structural engineer. And then by the following year, they basically have to have this work done. So we have these deadlines in place. And the real question is that, are they going to be able to meet these deadlines?
Mhm.
What's going to happen to these buildings where you have the majority of the people on a fixed income? Are they going to be able to, to afford? Are we going to get a mass amount of foreclosures because these people can't afford it? So as we were talking about earlier, is that, with any kind of, impacts that these things have, there's usually going to be opportunities on the other side for people and investors to come in and invest. And, developers for a long time have been looking for these types of buildings. And so the problem that developers have run into in coming in and basically kind of taking over one of these buildings and terminating the condo so they can redevelop the property into something new and, highest and best use is what we always talk about in real estate. There's a very high threshold to meet to be able to terminate. So what they're talking about now is another law that they want to put into place, which is a law that will allow these terminations to happen with not such a high threshold, and to also put into place protections for the unit owners. So the unit owner's not, well, oh, we'll give you 20,000 for your unit, instead of the market value of the unit. So what they're going to do, I think, is they're going to come up with a mechanism as to how developers can come in and, we can sort of get the best of both worlds, where the developers can redevelop these buildings, but the unit owners, don't get, shortchanged by having to accept, very little money for their units. So it remains to be seen, what domino effect this law is going to have. But what's clear is that condos are not going to be able to do what they did in the past. And that means that these older buildings are going to need to spend money. And most of them don't have money. So where does the money come from? They're going to have to get a loan and secure it with the special assessments, or they're going to have to specially assess all of the unit owners. There's a building in the port, I think it's called the Merino at Portofino in Miami Beach, where each of the unit owners were assessed $156,000 each.
Wow.
Okay. Each. So,
Wow.
these are, they're big dollars that we're talking about. And so, again, you're probably going to get, a mass exodus from condos. If you have, and you started this conversation by saying, you're not a big investor in condos. Neither am I. I don't like condos. I've never liked condos. I don't like anything that has a governing body, anything that I, you don't have control over it.
Right.
So the government, and this is what's happened for many years. I mean, investors that have bought in condos probably said, yeah, we want to replace the balconies because it will increase the value of our investments. But the board says, well, no, we're not going to do that because it costs too much money.
Yeah.
And so you have no control, and you're part of this organization that may not have the same investing philosophy you do. So I agree. I think it's better to buy something where you can stick a sign in the front yard, and not have to worry about, somebody telling you what to do. So, that there's that. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, because there's two things that are happening with condos. One of them has been a bit historic, and what it is there's something called the Florida Fire Prevention Code. And the Florida Fire Prevention Code was something that was implemented back in like the late 90s that said that, okay, every condo building that's 6 stories or more, okay, I think it's 75 feet is what it is, greater than 75 feet, about 6 stories, has to install life safety systems and sprinkler systems. So why is that important? Well, because if condos are forced to do this, it's a big number. I mean, it's millions of dollars to do. So we're back to the same thing. Now, what's happened is people from condos came and testified up in Tallahassee and said, no, this is going to be too expensive. We need more time. So that what they did was they sort of postponed the implementation of the law for many years, and they sort of kept kicking the can down the road again. And, so the latest one, the next compliance deadline is January 1, 2025, really at the same time that all of this other stuff under this new law also goes into effect. So if you're looking at buildings that are older, if you're looking at buildings that are 6 stories or higher, these are questions that you want to ask. What's in reserves? What are you planning on doing about the structural report, the phase 1, the phase 2? What are you doing about the sprinkler problem? Is there a plan in place? And if there isn't, you might not want to buy there. So, I mean, these are all, and so these are all things that I think that all taken together, could really cause havoc in the condominium market, in the used condominium market. So I would say, to the investors listening out there, be very careful, do your due diligence when you're buying a condo. I mean, my first advice would be, don't buy a condo as an investment. And that's my personal opinion. I mean, a lot of people probably differ with that. But, unless of course it's, you don't have any of these issues and, it's a great deal and you plan on flipping it maybe, but overall, I'm not a big fan of them. But if you are going to buy in the used condo market, used residential condo market, do your due diligence and make sure you're not buying yourself a problem, for sure.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I like that you've highlighted at least a couple of examples of some of the questions that investors should be asking if they are considering, investment, especially when it comes to condominiums, and
Right.
what are the different items to actually look for when you go through that due diligence process.
I have a couple of things to add to that as well, because along the same lines, because it's a pretty broad topic, is that
Mhm.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have implemented new rules where they're going to really be scrutinizing what loans they buy that are secured by a condo.
Right.
So again, if you got Fannie Mae and Freddie looking at it, again, you're buying an investment that maybe you can only sell to a cash buyer. So you got to
Exactly.
take that into account when you're investing in a condo, and also insurance. I mean,
Yeah.
insurance is not easy to come by anymore, because condos are now being scrutinized by insurance companies. They say, well, why do we want to insure this building unless you've done your structural and engineering? You showed us that
Mm.
these possibly life-threatening situations have been resolved.
Absolutely.
So it's there's definitely a lot to look at there, and you definitely want to be very careful.
Yeah, it definitely takes a special skill and, patience at the end of the day, and developing that muscle to be able to navigate these waters because it's ever
Yeah,
changing. There's a
it
lot of
is.
moving parts at the end of the day, and staying on top of that is very important, especially if you are operating in investment class such as condominiums. Which leads me to a further point when it comes to kind of that, the creativity, or essentially being able to adapt to different times, investors adopting different strategies, and one of those is the rental arbitrage that we've been hearing
Right.
all along. It's been a very hot topic, especially on social media. A lot of the quote unquote influencers that are
Right.
specializing in this space. And just to summarize, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting what it's all about, is at the end of the day, you go out there. It's not, I mean, it sounds very easy, but at the end of the day, you go out there, you find a property owner or a property that's been listed for rent for quite some time, and obviously they cannot rent it out. And what you tell them in exchange is, transfer or hand over that property over to me, and I'm going to list it on, let's say, short-term rental platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, and so forth. I'll generate X, amount of money per month from this exercise, and your cut is going to be exactly that. Maybe from a perspective of the risks that are involved for both parties, for the owner of the property and the person who is executing that type of structure, can you speak a little bit further about some of the risks that both parties should be aware of?
Sure. So this falls under the investment category. I know it's referred to as rental arbitrage, but it's actually a concept that's been around for quite a long time, and it's referred to in a lot of the investment books and seminars that are out there as master leasing. It's a you have your it's a master lease with a sub ability to sublease. And so for the owner, of course the owner would want to make sure that there's proper insurance, and for the owner, you have, there's going to be liability, of course, because it's being rented as an Airbnb. You still own the property. You're still, as an owner, responsible for taxes and for insurance, and all of those things. So and a lot will depend on how the actual agreement is negotiated. But generally speaking, the nuts and bolts of it is that, like you said, you find it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's on the market. It could be something that's been on there for a long time. I mean, that's probably a better target, because those landlords might be a little more motivated to do a deal like this. And like you said, I mean, it sounds great in theory, but it's not that easy to find an owner that understands this or wants to take that kind of risk. But there are a lot of them out there that will. So you can, typically what I recommend that people do is they find, a good rental. I mean, you want it to be an Airbnb, something that's conducive to a good Airbnb, and so you want to find something like that. And then, basically if the landlord's asking, let's say they're asking $4,000 a month in rent, to rent on an annual basis. What I typically recommend that investors do is not offer 4,000, but maybe offer them a little bit of a premium. You got to make it worth their while, right? Why should I take those extra risks if I'm going to get the same amount of money I could do on an annual rental that is low risk, right? So I think that to sort of entice the landlord, you want to offer a little bit more money. You also probably want to take off the maintenance expense and the repair expense, and create some sort of a threshold that says that if the repairs or maintenance are less than this amount, we as the tenant will take care of it as if we're the owner. But if it's over a certain amount, then we'll take care of the first 5,000 and you're going to take care of the balance of it. Like for example, if there's a roof problem or whatever. And basically you rent it for, let's say they wanted 4,000 and you rent it for 5,000. So, then you're going to, of course, Airbnb it. And then, you got to make sure that you're at least going to cover obviously your 5,000. But in most cases, if it's a good Airbnb, if you're going to put a little money into the Airbnb to make it different, special, something that maybe is nobody else is doing. I mean, I think that's one of the keys with Airbnbs. And then, you're going to rent it on the daily basis and hopefully you generate that spread between the 5,000 you're paying the landlord and, whatever you can generate on an Airbnb.
Mhm.
I actually did one of these that we did on a lease option probably about a year and a half ago
Mhm.
and basically what we did is exactly that. We entered into the agreement, but we also did a lease option. So, because we wanted to be able to buy it, so we have an option to buy this property for the next 2 years at a fixed number. And during those 2 years, we can rent the property at whatever we want. We're renting it out for. I mean, we're renting. Our rental payment is $6,000 a month. But this is a type of Airbnb that you can get anywhere from 800 to 1,500, depending on the season. And so in ours, we had a 10,000 threshold. Again, that was negotiated. We started, of course, lower, but we have a $10,000 threshold, and then we have the option to purchase it. So we put down first, last, security, and an option payment.
Mhm.
And so we have about another, I guess, 8 or 9 months left on the lease. And so now we've started to, we're actually marketing the property for sale, and we have an assignable contract. We have a lease option which when we exercise it, we'll have an assignable contract. So we could either flip the contract, we could buy it ourselves, then and hold. We have a lot of options is the point. And so I think if you're going to do one of these types of deals, you want to have all those options available. Not everybody wants to buy it, but it's a good idea to have that that option to be able to do it. So that's usually the way that I recommend it. In terms of risks for the person that's actually going to be renting it out, the vacation renter, landlord,
Mhm.
not the actual landlord, but the tenant slash landlord.
Right.
um Again, it's you don't rent it enough. You have months where maybe in the summer where you're not generating enough to cut. Those are the types of risk that if you have a big threshold like we do at 10,000, that the refrigerator breaks, you're gonna have to replace it. But it's a great business. It's a great business model because again, it allows for investors who don't have a lot of money. You don't have a $500,000 laying around. Maybe you have 10, 15,000 bucks where it allows you to get into the game and and make some money on and control a piece of real estate for an extended period of time without having to have all the pitfalls of actually owning it, like paying taxes and insuring it and all those things. As a landlord's a tenant slash landlord that's going to be doing the Airbnb, you want to make sure you have liability insurance as well. That's going to be very important, and you do want to make sure that you buy in the name of a company. Okay, that where you're going to be asset protected in case there is a lawsuit, in case you have to, get out of the deal, where you're not, personally left holding the bag. So I think it's a great, it has some great opportunities. I mean, we've done very well with ours. And I got to tell you, when we were making offers on these things, and I said, look, nobody's ever going to take this, but let's give it a shot. Let's start making some offers. And lo and behold, I mean, we got somebody that was interested, and I was shocked, because I do this with a partner of mine, and my
Uh-huh.
partner is a little more optimistic, I guess, than I am.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, somebody's going to take this. Let's, and the guy took it. I mean, we were pretty shocked, and
How did you
uh
guys find him?
we just through MLS. I mean, I had
Oh, really?
a friend of mine that was, he found it, and one of the things that again, with the Airbnb space is that it's not a matter of just getting a property and throwing some furniture in there, which is what we made ours a specialty property. where we had an artist that, painted, we did ivy, we did lighting, we did, so a lot of stuff that was actually very cheap. We bought games, we bought a pool table, and we made it a place that people want to come and hang out, as
Unique
opposed to just a
experience.
house. Right,
Yeah.
an experience. And you want to, and I think that's the important point. You want to make it an experience. Have a theme, sports theme, or
Right.
a music theme, or whatever. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I think the only downfall right now is that because of the way the market has gone, a lot of people have gotten into the Airbnbs. A lot of people have also, who were not able to sell the houses, have decided to keep them in Airbnb them. So there is a little bit of saturation right now with Airbnbs, which, I don't know that it'll get any better this year, but that's something to watch for.
For sure.
One other point I wanted to make is with the specialties, is that we actually made an offer on the, if you're familiar with the show Stranger Things.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, and then this is where the specialty part comes in, is that we made an offer on the Stranger Things house in Georgia, and this was they were asking 300,000, and it was on, I want to say it was on 15 acres, and it was this little house. It was a nothing house. It was about a 1,200 square foot house, but Stranger Things was filmed there.
Wow.
So when we made the offer, we actually went about 100,000.
Also, it was actually used for one of the episodes. It wasn't just a
Stranger Things.
design, right?
No, it was filmed. The show was filmed there. So people
No
who
way.
watch the
No way.
show, and I've only seen, one season of it, but people
Right.
who are like fanatics of the show, it's one of these guys, a cult following.
Yeah, there is a
And so
following to
people know the house.
it. Mhm.
So, we thought, let's make an offer on it, and we can turn it into an Airbnb. It's got a property big enough. You could do weddings there. You could do all sorts of things there. Well, long story short, the house sold for 600,000. So we
Wow.
were off by a couple $100,000. It sold for double. And then the people that bought it have it booked Airbnb for 2 years out. I
Wow.
mean, it was a home run. Oh, total home run. But again, so if you're getting into the Airbnb space, I think that the key, because of the competition that there is now, it's getting is really specialty houses that have some sort of a historical kind of hook to them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. No, that
yeah,
makes a lot of sense, because at the end
yeah,
of the day, I have a few Airbnbs of my own, and
right,
I always preach that the most important factor when it comes to success in that game, because there is a lot of competition, especially in the
there
past
is.
couple of years, is you are not in the game of lodging or renting. You're in the game of selling experiences. Because at the end of the day, this is what people are all about when they're looking for, a particular place to book on the Airbnb, is
Right,
that
that's right.
experience. So that's a very interesting point. And arbitrage that you were talking about provides another avenue, especially for newer
Right,
investors, to be
right,
able to
right,
get into that game.
right,
Um,
right.
Tell us a little bit further, when it comes to, um, we also see this emergence of, maybe it's just in my own little bubble that I live in, from the wholesaler side, where you have this kind of intermediary essentially between the investor and the seller, where they go out there and they find a deal and they negotiate
Right.
with the seller, and they find actually a buyer or an investor who is looking to purchase that particular asset, and they negotiate a transaction between the two, and they essentially reassign the contract, or they sell the contract. So just the wholesaling side of that.
Right, right, right.
Maybe
Another
talk
great,
to, talk to us a little
area.
bit further about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
What are the different
Yeah.
risks to
Well, I
consider
think
when
I
doing
think
that?
that's one of those really great areas. And again, because I do deal with a lot of investors, and I
Yeah.
teach classes at the board, and I've taught classes to investors, and a lot of these concepts do require some capital. They require you got to have a lender in place, or you got to have your own cash. And so one of the areas that, in addition to the rental arbitrage, which I think is an area that you can get into as an investor with not a lot of money. Another area that's a similar type of play in terms of the amount of money that you need to get into the game is wholesaling, and wholesaling is really nothing more than selling a contract. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really all it is. And like you said, I mean, you got to, if you're someone who knows how to go and find deals, then you can become an investor too. You can go
Mhm.
out and you can find these deals, and you enter into the contract with the owner, and then, like you said, you serve as sort of an intermediary. So once you've locked in that contract, which, by the way, I think is extremely important for the new investors to understand. I think a lot of people overthink things, or they want to talk to everybody before they make the offer. I always say, forget it. Make the offer, get it locked in, and then you worry about all the other stuff. because you're going to have a period of time within which you can cancel anyway,
Right.
for any reason or no reason, depending on the contract you're using. But I think that it's if you're someone who knows how to find these deals, then by all means go do it. Lock the contract in, and then the key, I think, is having a network of other investors who are, sort of that second tier of people, or that really first tier,
Mhm.
that are the ones that are going to want to, they want the deal and they're willing to pay for the deal.
Right.
And so, for those of you that don't know the nuts and bolts of this, I'll just quickly tell you that you enter into contract with the seller for $200,000, let's say. And then you're going to take that contract and you go to somebody, like John, and you say, John, I got this deal. I got it. I'll sell you the agreement for $10,000 or $20,000 or whatever the number is that makes sense. And so, because once you have a contract that you've entered into, and as long as it's assignable, that's the key. It's got to be assignable. So if you're using the FAR contract, for example, that would be paragraph 7. You want to check the box that says can freely assign. And then, so once you have that contracted in, you now have a commodity. You now have something you can sell. What are you selling? You're selling the rights to buy.
Your contract.
And so, right. And so, so what you would do next is, once John says to me, yeah, great, Michael, I want to buy it. Let's do it for 20 grand. Then we enter into what we call an assignment of contract agreement, which is nothing more than a contract to purchase a contract, right? And that agreement is going to have, it's going to mirror a lot of the things that the regular contract will have, like a deposit. So if I gave my seller a $5,000 deposit, I'm going to make sure I get 5,000 from John, at least 5,000, preferably 10. So if he doesn't buy and he defaults, I make 5 grand for doing nothing, right? And so that agreement will have a deposit. It'll have, certain parameters. And then basically at that point, once you've received your deposit, and once the closing is ready to happen, then you can go ahead and assign the contract to that person. And they step into your shoes and they buy at closing. And then you, as the investor, in my case, I'm getting the $20,000 fee. I would have a $20,000 fee on the closing statement that would go directly to me for being the intermediary.
Almost like a commission, right?
Well, no, not a commission. And that's what I was just about to say. You're reading my mind. There's a distinction. Most people think that, oh, well, don't you need a broker's license to do that? You don't, because you're not brokering anything. What you're doing is you're taking an interest in the deal. You have skin in the game because you're putting a deposit, you put your name on it. And, so it's not a commission, it's a fee. It's an assignment fee. And you do not need a real estate broker's license to do those kind of deals. Okay. So, and that's, again, what makes it also a little bit easier, that, there isn't a lot of obstacles or roadblocks to get into this kind of thing. It's just, as aggressive as you want to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a relationship game at the end of the day. I know quite a few that are successful in that space, and those people are master networkers. They have a great network of sellers, great network of investors, great network of attorneys like yourself.
Yes. I mean,
structure the deal, because at the end of the day, it's not a simple transaction to put together. So I would imagine your involvement, or an attorney like yourself, would be very heavy in that space.
And again, I mean, it's really something that for someone who's a novice that's never done it before, they probably want to have somebody to kind of walk them through it, whether it's an experienced investor, an attorney like me, or whatever. But usually when you've done a few of them and you have your forms all together, you can pretty much go and have at it, and and get out there and play the game.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Last area that I want to cover with you is, you've mentioned that as part of your practice or specialties, you work a lot with the foreign investors that from Latin America, Central America, and overseas and stuff like that. And from my standpoint, I have a venture capital fund, and majority of my investors, LPs, are foreign investors from overseas, from where I'm from Kazakhstan, Southeast Asia, and all of that stuff. And I get a lot of questions from them, especially when it comes to investing outside of the fund on their own, to be able to take their own investment and put that into, let's say, a real estate asset. And as a foreign investor, maybe I realize there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of intricacies, and you and I can probably do a whole episode about that.
Yeah.
But from kind of the most important elements when it comes to foreign investments and being able to invest into real estate here in the United States? What are some of the things, maybe some of the advice that you provide to some of your clients when they set out on that journey to be able to invest into real estate legally and at the same time not necessarily have the physical presence here?
Right. So typically, when I consult with a foreign investor, the first question is going to be is, what country are they from, and are there any tax treaties between the two countries?
Mm.
So for example, a lot of the Northern European countries like Denmark and Sweden and Norway, Finland, the UK, Canada are very particular in the way that you would plan because there is a treaty. US has treaties with those countries.
Mhm.
But by and large, just about all of the rest of the world have to worry about certain taxes that can really affect them. So when I sit down with a foreign investor, I typically run through the following: privacy, liability, asset protection, taxation, and estate planning. Those are all things that and really for any investor, whether they're U.S. or otherwise, I mean, those are issues that you want to be concerned about. For purposes of the foreign investor, we typically, the first thing is privacy. You
Mhm.
know, a lot of people are, maybe they're coming from a country where the government is very intrusive, or, they don't want their government to know what they're purchasing in the US and those kinds of things. Or maybe they have an ex-wife, or maybe they have creditors or whatever. And so privacy becomes an issue. And there are ways still in the US where you can be anonymous, where if somebody goes on the internet, they're never going to be able to find you. And I have a lot of clients who that's one of their number one priorities, is to make sure that their purchases and their what they're buying in the US is private.
Mhm.
Now, there's also the Corporate Transparency Act, which just passed about a year ago, which is a federal law that will allow law enforcement access to a database where they'll know that what you own. But that's law enforcement. It's not, Brazil or Kazakhstan trying to log on to see, on Broward County property records to see what you own. So privacy, of course, is a big piece of it. The second part of it is going to be, liability and asset protection. If you're buying real estate, you're going to be a target. I mean, they say that you have about a 1 in 5 chance of getting sued in any given year. Anybody. Okay, that's
Wow.
a 20% chance. That's a big chance here.
Oh, wow.
We're a country of lawyers and a lot of sue happy people. But if you're a landlord, if you're a physician or a business owner, your chances of getting sued are much higher.
Mhm.
So, thinking about it in that framework, you got to protect yourself. So that's when, the structures come in, that we want to, when we purchase an asset, we want to make sure we put it into a holding company that's wrapped in maybe a management company, and maybe is wrapped in some other offshore vehicle. And so typically when we put these structures together, corporations are always going to be very prominent, whether they're an LLC or they're a corporation. And what type of entity we use will depend on the client, whether they're going to be taking cash out or whether they're just going to park it here and then wait until they sell. Because there's different, tax rates depending on what vehicle you use. So that's a big part of it. And then we talk about taxation. That's the big piece of it. So the taxation part of it is usually we talk about, we want to try to minimize, defer, or eliminate taxes, right? Legally. We don't want to do anything illegal, but we want to do all these things legally. So the one tax that is the most onerous and the most expensive for a foreign national is the estate tax. Okay, so if you have someone from Brazil or from Colombia or from Peru who comes here and buys a property, whether it's in their personal name or in a corporation, they are subject to the estate tax.
Mhm.
So the estate tax is 40% of the value of the assets at the time of death. Okay, think about that for a second. So
Wow.
I bought $1 million condo down on Brickell for you to use as a second home. I bought it for cash, and I buy it in the name of an LLC, and I die. Okay, the U.S. government's going to take $400,000 approximately of that of the value of that unit at the time of death, of all amounts over 60,000. So
Mhm.
the foreign national has a $60,000 exemption, meaning that at the time of death, if your assets are worth $1 million, everything over that 60 is going to be taxed at 40%, the
Well,
death tax.
mhm.
Now, if you own something, of course, that's, a 60,000, I don't know where you're finding it, but there are, $50,000 condos, and maybe you don't have to worry about it. But the US citizen, US resident like us, we have, if you're married, I'm married, we have a 24 million, almost 24 million, $23.6 million exemption, meaning that at the time of my death, if my total assets are not more than 23.6 million, okay, then I'm not going to pay an estate tax.
Mm.
But a foreigner, when they die, they have a $60,000 exemption. So everything above that is taxed at 40%.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. That's the biggest one. And to avoid that, there are ways to legally avoid that tax. And I think that in answer to your question, that's probably the number one issue for people from outside of the US that they have to worry about. And you could do it one of two ways. You could either do it with a life insurance policy if they're young enough and insurable, where you, in the case of the Brazilian who bought the $1 million condo, he would go buy a policy, a life insurance policy that would pay his heirs $400,000, so that if he dies, his heirs can pay the IRS. Fun, no problem.
Yeah.
The other way, and the more common way that this is handled, is through a multi-tier structure. So we would form a company in the US, but the company wouldn't be owned by the Brazilian. It would be owned by an offshore, maybe in the BVI and Nevis and Panama and some other country. And by doing that, you've taken the right of the United States to charge an estate tax outside of their jurisdiction, so they no longer can charge it. So the good news is that there's a legal way to get around that. So again, taxation is a big one. And the last piece of it is estate planning. What happens, who's my property? What are my properties? What's going to happen to my properties when I die? And for that, you would typically want to have some form of a trust that would dictate, who the properties are going to go to at the time of death. So you would want the company to be owned by probably, a trust. And that way, you have the company, the domestic company, you have the offshore company, and then you have a trust that owns the offshore company. And that's typically the most common way of taking care of privacy, asset protection, the liability, the taxation, and the estate planning.
Well, you just gave out probably $100,000 worth of legal advice just in that segment alone. So I definitely appreciated that, because I've, myself, having gone through that exercise multiple times, I understand the complexities of that, and at the same time, the importance of that, especially when it comes to, certain things that we as investors oftentimes overlook, or maybe we don't want to look at it because it's just unsexy when it comes to taxation. So that makes a lot of sense.
And one quick point I wanted to make with your fund is that any of the investors that are members or shareholders of the fund, and if the fund owns real estate, you want to their shares should be held in an offshore to avoid that estate tax issue, depending on how much they have. If the investment is less than 60, you probably don't want to worry about it. But if it's substantial, then it's something that they might want to consider in their planning.
Well, we're definitely going to host some type of a live Q&A or some type of session with
no problem.
Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of questions from that perspective, and I understand the importance of that. Last but not least, Michael, I love asking the question every guest on the podcast is, what is your personal content diet? Obviously, you know a lot about your space. You try to stay educated and, even informed on all the things that are maybe coming up, not necessarily that are going on in your space. Share some of the resources that you consume on a daily basis. How do you keep yourself educated and informed on all the things going on in your industry?
Oh, wow. I try to keep up to date as much as possible. I am a voracious consumer of media, and probably a little too much. I'm constantly looking to see my Twitter feed and, who's posted what, and all in the business space, not, what J-Lo is doing or something like that. I read the South Florida Business Journal religiously. I read the Daily Business Review. I read Florida Trend Magazine, which is a great resource because it tells you what's going on in the different regions, what companies are moving in, what companies are laying off people. It's a great resource. I also have probably, I don't know, about 150 different Google alerts and all the different, spaces that I work in. So between all that, I sort of, I keep up to date on what's happening, and my pulse of, to keep my, my eye on what's happening in my space, in my backyard.
Mhm.
Mostly it's going to be, things in South Florida or Florida. But those are pretty much the resources that my go-tos. And again, I have a lot of other people that I follow on Twitter that are in the commercial real estate space, for example, in the investment space, in the tokenization of real world assets,
Hmm.
blockchain. I'm fascinated by all of these things. And I think it's, in tokenization in particular, I think is still in its infancy, and we're going to see major growth over the next few years with that. A lot depends on how all the regulation plays out, because that's a really big topic right now. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I read anything and everything. I read the Miami Herald religiously every day since I was about 14 years old. I don't know why. It's just like an obsessive compulsive thing. I got to read the Herald. And just, any of the publications that are, my journals, the real estate journal that's put out by the Florida Bar, the Florida
Mhm.
Bar Magazine, all of those things. And I attend a lot of seminars regularly, and I teach them. And in the course of teaching the seminars, I learn myself, because, a
Right.
lot of times they tell me, we want you to teach on the new condo law. Well, I haven't
Mhm.
even read it, but
Yeah.
since I'm going to teach on it, I'm going to learn about it. So
Yeah.
I would encourage everybody out there that if you have the opportunity to teach and to get up in front of people and convey information, do it. It's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to network, and it's a great way really to learn, for yourself. So
Well, speaking of learning, I personally learned quite a bit from this episode, even though it was a relatively short conversation, but definitely
yeah,
packed with a lot of valuable insights, valuable, no fluff at the end of the day, which is why I really love this conversation, and
yeah,
definitely begs for part two, part three, part four, part 11. So
let's
the
do it.
moment we can get on your calendar again, I would love
Yeah,
to get on that. And Michael, really appreciate your time today and being so generous with your advice.
no, my pleasure, and we'll be in touch.